Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
In the course of this set of lectures on inclusive growth, today we turn our attention to the issue of women's rights. Naturally, we will be asking whether economic growth that we have witnessed since 1947 has really been inclusive as far as women are concerned. As a matter of fact, in 1950s, when the planning was launched, and for quite some time till the end of the 20th century, women's issues were always regarded as marginal issues by the government of India. The women's problems were tagged along with welfare issues, women's and children's issues, and women, children and weaker sections issues were all tagged together, and it was felt that women's main issues are about welfare, and that with development the women of India will also get benefits directly or indirectly from the various development programs that had been launched. In fact, here it should be mentioned that although during the freedom struggle women were encouraged to come out into the streets and encouraged to participate, most of the leaders of the national struggle had the idea that women may perhaps need education, all right, so that they can become better mothers, but actually their women's role was actually looked upon as a role, as a domestic role. Women were supposed to be homekeepers, caregivers, and it was assumed that women are supposed to be homemakers and caregivers, rather than come and participate in public life, and actively participate in implementing programs of development. Very many of the leaders of the women's movement in the early 1940s and 50s were all women who excelled themselves in the sphere of social work, in the sphere of providing health care and so on. Many of the leading women political persons were all those who established their names in these what will now be regarded as peripheral areas, not really involved in issues of national reconstruction in a very big way. Now, this was also in consonance with the orientation towards women during that time. Although many of our leaders were educated abroad, and they were they professed socialist creed of equality and all that, when it comes to women, they assume that women will naturally want to get married and look after their children and their husbands. This was, and the elders in the family. This was the prevalent notion at that time. It was only in 1974, during Indira Gandhi's prime ministership, that women's movement gained strength in the country. You see, it's very interesting that women had, according to, on the basis of universal adult franchise, women had equal rights to, with others as far as, voting is concerned, and also they could they can also contest elections. There was no bar on that. But yet this notion of free citizenship, equal citizenship, did not extend to women to the extent that they had to be drawn in to political processes, to participate in political processes in a major way, and they should be drawn in to in the mainstream social and economic life, so that they can contribute their might to nation building. Now, in 1974, it was in 1974 that the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi set up a committee to report on the status of women. This was known as the Committee on the Status of Women. Headed by a leading social scientist, Dr. Veena Mazumdar. This committee came up with a report titled Towards Equality. It was published in 1974. It was published in 1974. This committee's report was titled Towards Equality. This report became an eye-opener on the conditions of women in India. All right. Of course, this was the first attempt to study women's issues in depth. This report looks at women both at home and in public space. Public life. And this report points out that, in fact, women have been discriminated against both at home and in public life. How at home? One of the I think this report was the first one to sensitize us to the idea of sex ratio. It pointed out that looking at the Indian censuses, analyzing Indian censuses, it pointed out that there were missing women in the Indian census. The missing women were the Indian census had not captured the process of, had captured the process, but nobody had given attention to it. The phenomenon of missing women. What's this phenomenon of missing women? That is, that's all about sex ratio. That is, usually, to repeat what I have stated earlier several times in previous lectures, usually, biologically, women, in an average, in any society, the proportion of women will be slightly higher than the proportion of men. If there are 1,000 men in India, in a country, there will be slightly more than 1,100 or 1,080 women in that country. This was because of their biological makeup. Women are supposed to be more resilient in terms of their health than men. So, therefore, this is also applicable to infants. Male infants are more vulnerable to health issues than female infants, and this it is some biologists say that this is the one method by which the human species ensures that it survives in the struggle for survival, because it's the women who become more important than men as far as struggle of survival of the species is concerned, of the species of the Homo sapiens. Now, the sex ratio, it pointed out that the sex ratio, that there is a sexual imbalance in as far as women were concerned. There was the sex ratio against women, it worked against women. For every 1,000 men, sex ratio has been varying between 940 and 970 in different states. I have the data. That is the, and even if you assume that there should be 1,000 women per 1,000 men, then you will find that 60 women for every 1,000 men are missing. And this, the report pointed out, was due to the Indian preference for male children, son preference. This is called son preference. Traditionally, Indian parents prefer sons, and because of that, they, prefer to neglect. If a female child is born, there in some parts of the country, in some subcultures, there was this practice of female infanticide. Female infants used to be, killed through neglect. Of course, the female infants were always in the family. The girl children were always neglected. They were not they were denied a nutritious food, and it was in fact their brothers who got nutritious food in the family, who got the first preference in food matters, who also got first preference in in pursuing careers and all that. After all, women were these girls were supposed to be anyway moving out of their once they get married, they go off to another house, and the investment in these girls will be not productive for the family, for the household. This was the kind of notion that prevailed. Of course, subsequently, with with advances in technology, especially this ultrasound scanning, women's sun preference could be perfected even better, because they can scan the fetuses and get them aborted if the fetuses turned out to be female fetuses. So the report pointed out that even before birth, women are discriminated against, and after they are born, again there is the parental parents practice various types of discrimination against girl children and neglect their health, and and give them less nutritious food, and give them if they educate them, they're supposed to work at home. They're not supposed to. They're supposed to lend their hand to their mothers in household maintenance, in cooking, and so on, in giving care for the elders and all that. They're supposed to be socialized into those things, into those tasks. So what is very interesting is that this report pointed out that our famous Indian family, we even today, we consider our family values as primary, and we regard our there are politicians, political leaders, there are very many people who are many observers and scholars, intellectuals who can talk about casteless society, but nobody talks, but everybody regards the institution of the family as a sacred institution. It is given a kind of it's a kind of a valued institution, and nobody talks about changing family relationships. Only now people are becoming aware of the need to change family relationships, change relationships within the family, within marriage also. But looking at this, what this report did was to question this institution of the family from the women's perspective. This institution of the family is quite repressive, uses traditional values of son preference, all right, uses traditions, all right. Not only this, even traditions, that have evolved in our culture. It used to be the case that in some castes there used to be, during weddings, especially, during weddings, the grooms were were given dowries. Dowry was a kind of a prestation, and that means a kind of a sum of money, sum of goods that are given to the bridegroom's family as a kind of an acknowledgement of the superior status of that family, all right. So as an acknowledgement of the honor of the groom's family. But of course, in India, among several castes, there was also the practice of bride price, especially among the castes lower down the hierarchy. There was a practice of bride price. Even among Brahmins in several parts of South India, there was a practice of bride price, where you give gifts to the bride to bring her home, because it is you are getting the bride to, bride and her ability to work for the family. Because of that, you used to give, there used to be the practice of bride price. But gradually, bride price, those castes, which were, which had this practice of bride price, gradually moved over to dowry, because dowry is also an acknowledgement of honor of the son's family, acknowledgement of the importance of the son, of the male, right? And it's also, it also made, it also, so the thing is that they shifted from bride price to dowry, because dowry is an acknowledgement of honor as well as acquisition of wealth by, for having given the son in marriage to that bride. So, be that as it may, what this towards equality report pointed out was that woman in the traditional, in the home, was regarded as a reproductive, was valued for her reproductive powers. That is, for her powers to, care for the family, and for the, for the powers to produce children. She is a childbearing machine. Even in this, the report points out that this tradition, in tradition, the notion that woman should eat last, woman should make the woman of the family should make sacrifices, meant that even mothers, there were, of course, mothers, when they became pregnant, they were given special diet in our culture. But still, the fact that they were deprived of essential nutrients before they became pregnant also meant that you produce underweight babies, you produce children who have health problems and all that. It wasn't realized. They, according to the tradition, was blind to, these issues. They did not really, the tradition, as I'll have to mention here, when I'm talking about tradition, I'm not saying that it is tradition. It is tradition in the sense that they are all practices which we have derived from our ancestors, several generations away. In these traditions, tradition is actually a modern, a way of society, considering some aspects of our culture as historically rooted and valuing it as tradition. So, tradition is what each generation defines as tradition by interpreting its the inherited knowledge that it has acquired in a selective manner. So, this according to this, what I am trying to say is that traditionally women, it was a patriarchal society, that is male dominated society, tradition, in which women were confined to the home and were regarded as second-rate citizens within the family, and they were subjected to very many oppressions, especially because in some parts of North India, this doesn't apply to South India because of cross cousin marriage. In some parts of North India, the bride comes from a different kin group, from a different village. So, as a result, the bride is looked upon as somebody, as an outsider, and therefore she is treated They, of course, all about mother-in-law, son, daughter-in-law relationships. So she's treated as an outsider, and she's always excluded from the benefits that sons and male members of the family enjoy. In fact, till I should say that in 1956, the Hindu Succession Act was passed to sort of introduce to ban bigamy, and even then, even when the Hindu Succession Act was passed, they did not touch the law about inheritance. Women did not have any right to inheritance in the Indian family till very recently. It was only in 2005 that when the law was amended and the Hindu Succession Act was passed, women were given equal rights with their brothers in the family property. They will have equal share with their brothers. So this is about the way in which patriarchy operated at the family level. Now, towards equality also pointed out that these women were discriminated against also in public life, in matters of employment. In this context, it pointed out that women were engaged in various industries in the colonial times, all right, in the industries that were available, that had cropped up in the colonial era. But this report points out the steady decline of women in industrial work. Women gradually lost their employment opportunities. In the employment opportunities in industry shrank gradually, and so they were also discriminated against in the sphere of work. Now, so the report concluded that both modernity and tradition, all right, intersected in the Indian context to discriminate against women. This was the gist of this report, and following this report, there was a spurt of studies, women's studies in various social sciences, in various fields of social sciences, and very many scholars, especially women scholars, got together and worked, did extensive research to point out very many interesting facets of the issue of gender, women's rights. One of the things that emerged is that with regard that religion wise, Hindus regard that we are more progressive in our treatment of women than other religions, all right. But clearly, data there's data available which points out that women the sex ratio is tilted against women, especially in those states where Hindus are in a majority. And then not only that, there is also an interesting, demographic data available, which says that if you look at the preference, there's data that these women scholars, feminist scholars have dug up, that shows that the notion of patriarchy should be amended for one reason, that the way patriarchy works on different strata of women is different. In fact, what these scholars have pointed out is that those women who are who belong to the Dalit category, scheduled castes or scheduled tribes, are more prone to, or especially scheduled castes, tend to suffer from patriarchy in different ways than women of the upper castes. And therefore, it says, it points out, these scholars have pointed out that women's movement for rights cannot be, has to take into account the diverse realities of women in different castes. You see, it's pointed out, for instance, that a Dalit woman, her chances, the cumulative inequalities she faces, in her daily life, is quite different from the women of the upper caste. For instance, the Dalit woman invariably is married early, especially nowadays. She is married early, and she will have more children at an early age, and she is most likely that she'll be poor, and she is not educated, not highly educated, and therefore she will have to depend on male supports in the family, if she is, and she is also discriminated in terms of caste. All right, she will not get unlike women of upper caste, she will not get she is handicapped to get jobs, to even know that there are jobs available for which there are opportunities available for her in public life, outside, and so on. So the Dalit women's what shall I say, condition is repression. The oppressions that they feel is quite distinct from the oppressions that upper caste women feel. The weight of oppression for upper caste is less, and they can and many of the upper caste women can move out of can sort of resist depression. They resist this kind of oppression because they get educated, they also get jobs outside, and so on. And in fact, they can turn the institution of family to, they can use the institution of family to their advantage by using their mothers and their kin to help them in looking after family if they are successful in their career. So many of these scholars have brought out this point that women's suppression differs across caste and also community. The kind of women's suppressions, the kind of oppressions that women face in among the Muslim, in the Muslim community is quite different. We all are now familiar with the triple talaq as an institution. We also know how women are, that issue of Shabano case. This was about iddat, that is, when you divorce. It's very easy in Islam to divorce when the sum that is to be given for maintenance. That became a big issue because the traditions, because Muslims felt that the judgment hurt their core Islamic practices. And then, of course, even Muslim women, while Hindu women got equal rights to family property, Muslim women only get half the share of they get half the share of what the son gets as his share of the property. So there are different types of oppression and discrimination in different communities. So this is the feminist point. The feminist scholars point out that we should be very discriminating in talking about patriarchy, and that's also helpful because if you want the women to liberate themselves from these oppressions, the strategy that needs to be used will have to be the policies and the strategies that need to be used. That need to be used should be different. For instance, I have not talked about work participation rate in connection with women's rights, women's issues. Work participation rate. You see, in India, from the early days, it is pointed out that work participation, women's work participation rate is about 25% of the workforce in urban areas, and about 40% in rural areas. Of the total number of women who are available for work, who can work, only 40 who are in the working age group, only 40%, in rural, around 40%, roughly around 40%, and in urban areas only 25% are working. Why is that the case? This is because of the taboo on women's working outside. Women are supposed to be respectable women, or not. Women belonging to respectable families are not supposed to go out and work. They are supposed to be, indoors. And especially among the Muslims, this is very strictly observed. So much so that in poor Muslim households, women can only take up if they get work, it's a kind of home-based work, like very very exploitative, low wage, low paid work, like for instance beedi rolling, or this thing agarbatti rolling or beedi rolling, and these kinds of work that can be done in the home environment. They don't have to, they can't, or embroidery or other things. They are not supposed to leave the home, go outside. But amongst the Dalit, scheduled caste, and in fact scheduled tribes also, the women go out to work. They don't, because their poverty drives them to go out and work, and in any case they are expected to go out and work. Whether it is fetching wood, water, for wood for cooking, water for cooking, all right. They have to do all the jobs which are considered as drudgery, and then they have to look after children, their babies, and their old and old relatives who are there in the family. So what happens is that that is the I'm not now talking about the work that they do at home, but women go out to work also as casual laborers, as coolies, in agricultural fields, so that they can earn some money because their poverty drives them to do that. And that is supposed to be a menial job. Women going out to work is supposed to be degrading for that entire family, entire caste. So it's only usually the lower caste women who are who participate in work, in work. But when a family gets rich, what it does is it sort of withdraws the woman from working outside, because it's supposed to if you keep your woman inside, it enhances the family's prestige. So for these various reasons, what happens is that there is a tendency not to allow women to go out to work, go outside to work. So as a result, what happens is in India, work participation rate for women is supposed to be low as compared to other countries. It's now demographers argue that work participation rate has improved among women across all the castes because of one thing, because the fertility rate, the number of total fertility rate, the number of children, the number of children they have in their has come down, and that means that that frees them. And also because the notion, there are very many jobs that have come up, which in fact, if women take to those tasks, jobs like in the education sector, in the health sector and all that, in fact the family is wealth improves, where family's income increases, as well as its prestige. So for these reasons, work participation rate is getting higher day by day. But the point that I'm trying to make is that as this report pointed out, modernity along with tradition ensured that women's rights to equality were shortchanged, because of this collusion between modernity and tradition. Now, the situation for women's rights has changed somewhat in the positive direction. Women have fought for their rights, and in some cases, in very many cases, they have also won their rights. You see, after this report, right, the next landmark for the women's rights issue was about the 73rd Constitutional Amendment on Panchayat Raj institutions that was introduced in 1992 by the Rajiv Gandhi government. It it made for compulsory representation of women, especially from the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, in the panchayat bodies. And it also said that there should be reservation for women chairpersons of panchayat bodies. This was a remarkable legislation which forced women to come out and take part in elections and win. You see, while this happened, it's also important to which I will be, to this issue I will be returning very soon, is also important to recognize that while this reservation for women in these panchayat bodies were recognized very easily, the same thing is not being, the reservation for women in parliaments and state legislature bodies, 30% reservation for women, has not been, passed by the parliament for more than a decade, for more than, it's coming close to 2 decades now. This bill has been, women's reservations bill has been kept in abeyance in the Rajya Sabha. That is because I'll discuss this particular issue towards the end. That's one. That's another thing is that I should also have mentioned that the government passed a dowry, anti-dowry act. In the Indira Gandhi government which passed the anti-dowry act, which made dowry giving punishable, which also gave some relief to women. But apart from that, if you look at the women's rights issues today, it is mostly about what they call, mostly about the way women are treated in their workplace, right? Not that, as a consequence of this, there is also, it has also, has had an echo in regard to the domestic sphere also, but mainly nowadays the main issues that the women's rights movement is are highlighting is not so much about dowry. It's about sexual harassment in the workplace, right? It's about rape in public spaces, right? In fact, after that Nirbhaya killing, after the Nirbhaya episode in 2016, December 16, 2016, the government of India passed a very interesting act, sexual harassment, prevention of sexual harassment of women at workplace, Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013 was passed, right, to address the issue of sexual harassment in public place. And after the Nirbhaya episode that took place, in fact, yes, after the Nirbhaya episode took place, Nirbhaya episode took place in 2012. Sorry, it's not 2016. After the Nirbhaya, this act makes provisions, says that every, wherever there are women wherever women are employed in offices, there should be a committee to go into gender grievances of women, and that and that any matter, any complaint that the women colleagues make should be taken up by these committees, and punishment should be awarded, and this sexual harassment, and further subsequently these the sexual harassment and rape are to be punishable, severe punishments were to be awarded for the offenders, and so on. In fact, many stalwart politicians, some of the stalwart politicians thought that this was too very harsh on men, because one of them said that after all boys will be boys, but still these very strict laws, severe laws, this was a very severe law that was passed. So this is another gain. Now the issue of rape has become prominent, and the issue of women varying what they the issue of women's movement which has gained prominence. The issues that have gained prominence are about women having the right to wear the clothes they want, women having the right to walk the streets that they even in the night, without being asked. There was always this notion of Lakshman Rekha, decent women, Lakshman Rekha, decent women dress decently in public, and that they don't go, decent women do not invite trouble by going out alone in the nights and all that. That's because these issues are becoming prominent, because women are breaking glass ceilings. This notion of glass ceiling is that there was a notion that women at work can go up to a certain point, but they can't reach the top because there is a glass ceiling, invisible ceiling, that works to prevent them, to push them down, because in male dominated, most of the commercial establishment, most of the corporations tend to prefer men. Men form a club, and they recommend each other for promotion and so on. So women cannot reach the top. Now that women are competing with men on equal terms, has meant that these issues of sexual harassment and rape have become more and more prominent. This is the way I read the newspaper reports and other events that are prominently projected on the TV in regard to women, because that shows that now women are not willing to accept that they should be confined to domestic spaces, to spaces that the men allow them to be confined in. The struggle for women's right, highlighting the issue of rape, also has perversely, this is another issue that we should seriously be concerned about, has perversely is raising issues about the institution of the family itself. Why? Because more and more the family norms are being violated, and then now the question is that women are talking about marital rape also, that is, they are being forced to that is rape. There can be rape within marriage when women that is when women do not give consent for the sexual act. It becomes and if the man aggresses upon them, it becomes an instance of marital rape, and women are protesting. They say that they should be they should be protected from this marital rape and rape of within amongst the kin of the husband's family, and so on and so forth. But this raises the issue of what will happen to the family, and what is this raises this issue of family and marriage. these are the twin institutions that which are regarded as basic institutions, which are valued institutions. These, the edifice of these institutions are being questioned. You see, this is marriage. Of course, we have data to show that marriage incidents of divorce have increased. All right, and what about family? Family as a unit. You see, in very many ways, when our NRI children do well in American schools and colleges and in research institutions, one of the comments that is made is that it's the family value that has ensured that the children are given, the attention is given to children's upbringing by both the parents, and because the attention and the sacrifices that the parents make, the children come up, perform very well. In fact, President Obama highly, sort of held up the Indian family system as an example for Americans to follow, because the emphasis they gave on education and all that. Now, if this, family, what will happen to family when there are problems of marital rape, when there are problems of, marriage breakups of breakup, frequently and so on, then what will happen to the family? That is, and what kind of, what will happen to the future generations? This is a question that needs to be answered. There's some kind of if you don't, all right, if you have problems with the family, can the government take over? Can government institutions, public institutions take over the job of the family? As of now, there is no answer to this question, that families, institutions, the government maybe, they can have trained women to mother, to mother and socialize, train men and women to socialize children and all that. But so far, the element of affection, family is also affection, and is also an institution that promotes affection. It's affection and love and care for both those who are talented children, as well as those who are weaker members of the family, who are not so talented. But there is no substitute for the family. So we are now, at present juncture, we are in a dilemma as to whether we should allow the family to break apart, and take different forms, which will not be conducive to the socialization of children, of the future citizens, or should we, in what way should we modify it, or in what way we can think of surrogate institutions. This is the problem that very many women's rights activists have not addressed, squarely. And, so long as there is no answer coming, I hope family as an institution will continue to work. Thank you very much.